Mr Chair, I advise that Councillor Marx will be absent today, and I move that she be granted a leave of absence from the meeting.
Seconded.
Meeting. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I now call on the Leader of the Opposition, Councillor Jared Cassidy, to address the chamber. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair. Over the past 2 years, this city and its people have been through some of the most trying times they will ever face. First, a crippling pandemic and now a devastating flood. Both impacted significantly on the lives of Brisbane residents. It's the responsibility of all levels of government to ease the burden of such disasters. It's the responsibility of all levels of government to reprioritise in such circumstances. And while this LNP Mayor will twist his words in an attempt to make you believe that he's done that, he simply has not. Another year goes by and another budget of disappointment is handed down by Adrian Schrinner and the LNP. Another list of promises this LNP Mayor doesn't intend to keep. Another document of debt and deficit and nothing to show for it. Another blow to Brisbane residents who have been through it all. You see, the truth about a leader's aspirations isn't in what they say, it's found in what they do. This LNP Mayor sends out rates bills each quarter, he takes your money and he assures you he's spending it wisely. But residents know from experience they can't trust a single word that Adrian Schrinner says. The Lord Mayor's spin is well versed at telling tall tales, but it's how he spends residents' money that tells the real story. The question residents are asking themselves is, am I getting good value for money? They pay their rates and each year they increase, but what level of service do they see in return for their hard-earned? Last year, the LNP Mayor hiked rates not once, but twice, and that was in the midst of a pandemic. Now, after a flood, this LNP Mayor is at it again, jacking up rates by record amounts. This year, residents will see an average rates hike of 4.93% under the LNP, the highest increase in a decade. Rates in this city have officially doubled since the LNP have been in charge. In 89 suburbs, we see rates hikes above the average. Some of those suburbs the LNP have hit hardest include Lake Manchester with a massive 7.3% increase, Grange 7.17%, Belmont at 7.17%, Geebung was 6.79%, Kedron at 6.5%, Carina Heights at 6.5%, Nathan at 6.9%, and residents in Parkinson have had their rates jacked up by 5.8%. In 80 suburbs, people will be paying higher than the average $1,808 bill. Now, when this LNP Mayor hiked rates, he didn't discriminate. Suburbs that were hit hardest by the 2022 February floods still saw increases well above the average. Wilston was hit with an increase of 6.83%, Windsor a hike of 6.23%, Deagon 6.36%, Albion 5.75% and Rockley 5.22%, just to name a few. This rates hike is heartless. He had crocodile tears just a few weeks ago about valuations, but didn't bat an eye in jacking up rates himself. With the cost of living increasing and interest rates on the rise, this record rates increase may tip some Brisbane families over the edge, and the LNP simply don't care. A few weeks ago, this LNP Mayor cut and paused hundreds of millions of dollars worth of suburban projects to supposedly pay for flood recovery bills. So why now this astronomical rates increase? This Lord Mayor's greed and incompetency are costing Brisbane big time. Residents are paying more and more and getting less and less back in return. Now, given the circumstances, you'd think we'd see record spending on flood mitigation projects. You'd expect a large budget commitment to new suburban drainage infrastructure, as well as the upgrade and maintenance of existing pipes and valves. Labor councillors stood up and called for $120 million to build, upgrade and maintain suburban drainage in this budget. But no, our calls and the calls of residents have again fallen on deaf ears. It's business as usual. It's LNP cuts and delays. In the last budget review, we saw a $6.5 million cut to stormwater infrastructure, a $1.1 million cut to drainage construction and resilience, and a $700,000 cut to stormwater rehabilitation. In this new budget, we see the LNP have allocated just $42 million to drainage. Last year it was $40 million, with that $7.5 million being cut from the budget. So after a 1 in 2,000 year flood event, all this LNP mayor could manage is a $2 million increase in drainage out of a $4 billion budget. Just like their response to the 2011 floods, this LNP administration's response to the 2022 floods is weak and falls well below the community's expectations. The financial response we see this week is just as abysmal as the LNP's emergency response we saw during that flood. Now, I've never felt more distant and less a part of council than I did during that 2022 flood disaster. I was one of the councillors that did not receive any of those early SITREP, situation reports, from council's local disaster coordination committee. I struggled to find out how information would be distributed and struggled to find relevant information. Council's communication was beyond poor. There was absolutely no advice or warning for people who experienced flash flooding. There was no proper and prior planning for adequate sandbags across our city. I made it clear to the Lord Mayor there were dozens and dozens of people that needed evacuations, and Council's position that night was that they needed to look after themselves and make that decision alone. I was blown away. And I remain stunned at how hollow Council's ability was to respond to the unfolding crisis and then the clean-up. Not only does Council under this LNP not have enough staff to close roads that are flooded, we simply don't even have any equipment anymore. The lack of council workers on the ground has left residents dangerously exposed during these natural disasters. The rollout of a curbside collection was so slow that no one in council knew when it would start, and the Lord Mayor himself was clueless. There aren't enough council staff to respond to disasters. There isn't enough equipment in an event like this to close roads and produce sandbags. There was inadequate communication and next to no accessible evacuation centres. Council is the lead agency when it comes to disaster coordination and failed in every way. This LNP mayor has addressed none of these critical concerns in the budget before us. Where in this budget does it talk about the need for more permanent staff on the ground to respond to disasters? Where in the budget does it talk about the need to organise suburban evacuation shelters or more sandbagging locations? Now, after 2011, the LNP-run council was advised to install backflow devices at 52 locations. They managed just 15. And they didn't take that recommendation seriously, and residents paid for their arrogance. Now, 10 years on, nothing's changed. There's no serious commitment in this budget to address drainage across Brisbane. How many times does it have to flood for the LNP to fund critical drainage infrastructure in this city and in our suburbs? They refused to learn from the 2022 floods, just like they refused to learn from the 2011 floods. Now, Council's damage bill for the floods, according to the Lord Mayor, has come in at $330 million. And to pay for this bill, he's taken some very interesting projects to the chopping block. There's the Enoggera Creek Sport and Recreation Precinct. Now, from the beginning, this project has been a problem for the LNP because from the beginning, they refused to consult with the community. They simply dropped plans in letterboxes and expected residents to stay quiet. Well, they didn't. And it caused their local LNP councillor, Andrew Wine, serious grief. Now, all of a sudden, that project has been chopped. It's a similar story for the Mowbray Park Vision, where the LNP mayor was planning to bulldoze a community facility that the community wanted upgraded instead. Now that project is on the indefinite back burner too. And as predicted, the 5 green bridges is now just one pedestrian bridge at Kangaroo Point and a cycleway extension over Breakfast Creek. The Pullen Vale councillor Greg Adaman killed the 5th bridge, and now the Lord Mayor has dropped the West End bridges using the cover of the floods, despite having no intention of funding them himself anyway. Then there are those monohull ferries, which the Lord Mayor ripped from the water 2 years ago, vowing that he would fix them after years of neglect. This abrupt decision, along with his closure of multiple ferry terminals, caused mass disruption to commuters. And for 2 years, those monohulls have sat rotting in the dry dock. This LNP mayor has had 2 years to restore them and hasn't because he never intended to do so. Now they've just pocketed $4 million from Transdev, which was to pay for the restoration of these monohulls. And now he's used the floods to kill off any responsibility for his neglect of these council assets. his LNP administration has also cut the North Brisbane Bikeway and blamed that on the floods as well. The state government completed stages 1 to 4 in January last year. This LNP-run council have had over a year to complete stage 5, but they never even started, and now it's cut entirely. Despite this, the LNP mayor has suddenly announced a cycling track for the Olympics. So instead of investing in critical suburban links for active transport, the LNP mayor is spending more than $16 million on a single cycling venue for the Olympics. That's the legacy Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner will leave behind. The village precinct projects have also fallen victim to this LNP mayor's cutting spree. As per usual, suburban projects and services are always first on the LNP's chopping block. Absolutely. 2 years ago it was curbside collection. This year it's park upgrades and active transport infrastructure. Perhaps the 2022 flood damage bill wouldn't have been so large if the LNP didn't starve suburban drainage projects and maintenance of funding for the last decade. This degree of neglect from the LNP isn't, of course, unique to drainage. We see it right across the city in all forms of fundamental suburban services and infrastructure. So we have a situation where the Lord Mayor tells us that these savage cuts were necessary to fund flood recovery last week, and then 2 days ago we're told that a 5% rate hike was needed to fund flood recovery as well. Well, the LNP can't have it both ways. We know the real story, but either way, it's the suburbs that will miss out. Being a ratepayer in this city is like dining at an overpriced, overrated restaurant. You pay big money expecting quality in return, but when your meal comes out, it's cold and the kitchen is full of rats and roaches. Residents are seeing their rates bills go up and up under the LNP, and they're paying beyond top dollar now. But when they walk around their neighbourhood, they're left feeling dissatisfied, disappointed and angry. Residents aren't getting value for money under this LNP administration. Over just 3 months, from November 21 to January 22, residents made almost 2,500 complaints about potholes. The LNP are blaming wet weather for this surge in complaints, but we knew the wet weather was coming. Every meteorologist in Australia was signalling a La Nina, very wet summer. But instead of being proactive and planning for an increase in potholes, this LNP administration refused to increase resources, instead leaving Brisbane drivers to fend for themselves on the roads. Wet weather or not, this LNP mayor has no proactive strategy to seek out potholes and fix them on the run. The Moreton Bay Regional Council has fitted garbage trucks with cameras to identify potholes. As the largest council in Australia, we are being put to shame by our smaller neighbours. Now, this LNP administration is not only outsourcing the filling of potholes, they're now outsourcing the identification and reporting of these potholes to residents. What are residents even paying rates for anymore? I'm starting to wonder. Parks remain overgrown, and when they're eventually mown, contractors leave the fields torn up and loaded with grass clippings. By contracting these jobs out, council has lost all control of when parks get mowed and the quality of the job. In just 3 months from November last year to January this year, council received nearly 4,000 complaints for long grass. In the 3 months since, we saw another 2,500 complaints. But still nothing is done. Nothing is fast-tracked, our resources aren't increased. It's business as usual under the LNP. We've even had residents in Virginia and Forest Lake asking if they can mow parks for themselves out of frustration. Once again, residents are paying their rates and are being forced to do council's job for them. In this city, we still have over 6,300 broken and dangerous footpaths in need of repair. And despite this, we saw a $170,000 cut to the footpath repair budget last month and $5.5 million worth of footpath maintenance incomplete and outstanding still. In this budget, it's no different. There are more cuts, more spin and false promises. The LNP mayor's announcement in the budget on footpaths is more spin than substance. The majority of his so-called footpath funding is to repair bikeways and to upgrade suburban parks, all dressed up as new footpaths. Don't take the residents for fools, Lord Mayor. The suburbs are being left to rot by the LNP. Almost every suburban service is now cut or delayed. The LNP mayor has even slashed the budget for mosquito spraying by $700,000 and will continue to cut it by $600,000 in future years. He has said that his administration predicts favourable weather conditions for the next 3 years and hence the cuts. What an absolute joke. At this rate, it's a miracle that bins are even being collected each week. The only suburban service that wasn't cut, though, was curbside collection, and perhaps the LNP are still licking their wounds after cutting it in 2020 and being met with a wave of backlash from residents and Labor. But I wouldn't hold my breath, considering the LNP's track record on curbside collection. It could be cut any day if the Lord Mayor decides to send another glossy newsletter out and needs the cash. We've seen mass cuts to grants for community clubs and organisations, and only a handful receiving support following the floods. Community grants were cut by $1.3 million this year. Now, he pretends to give with one hand and he takes with the other. It's never what it seems with this Lord Mayor's spin, and residents are fast learning that. We saw him use a community club as a backdrop for a press conference after the recent floods. Now, out of the 331 clubs that were impacted by that flood, the Lord Mayor awarded significant recovery funding to just 8. What a slap in the face to the 323 other clubs that have been left to fend for themselves. This funding for 8 clubs is token at best and an insult to the community clubs and organisations that work so hard every single day for their communities. The LNP Mayor is leaving our council facilities to rot while we have 150 organisations on the wait list looking for a home. It's not good enough. Residents pay their rates, but under the LNP, their publicly owned assets and facilities aren't being maintained. It's the same story of delays, cuts and underfunding with the LNP suburban park projects. Under this administration, there are $17 million worth of delays to park upgrades in Kedron, Murarrie, Wynnum, Chelmer, Archerfield, Nunda, Tingalpa, Carindale, Carina, Ellen Grove, Middle Park, Milton, Stafford, Rockley, Bowen Hills, Bridgeman Downs, East Brisbane, Inala and Nudgee. And this includes the much anticipated Nudgee Recreation Reserve upgrade, which the LNP Mayor and local LNP councillor Adam Allen have gutted. Residents were promised a BMX track, a dog off leash area and an exercise path, but they're getting none of those things under the LNP now. The Lord Mayor has cut the Mowbray Park Vision and Enoggera Creek Sport and Rec Precinct as well. In both of these projects, he refused to consult with the community and then seemed strangely surprised when his plans were met with a wave of backlash from residents. So instead of actually listening to them and giving them what they wanted, he threw the baby out with the bathwater and used the floods as a cover for his tantrum. So if this LNP Mayor doesn't get his way, he either ignores residents or quits in rage. The North Brisbane Bikeway is another victim of this Mayor's suburban neglect. And the state government has done all of the heavy lifting on this project, completing stages 1, 2, 3 and 4, and this LNP council is refusing to jump over that final hurdle. In fact, the Lord Mayor was very vocal in criticising the state government previously, saying they were taking far too long. Now the LNP Mayor has turned around and cut the last stage of this project altogether. How hypocritical. Stage 5 has been promised by this LNP administration for years now. Residents are paying their rates, but they're getting delays, gutted projects and complete cuts in return. Now, the rates bill still comes in the mail every quarter and gets paid every quarter, but where does all that money go? I don't think it's any secret. This LNP Mayor is particularly brazen with his rorts. He's unable to deliver a project on time or on budget, and he's obsessed with the inner city. The biggest black hole project has this LNP Mayor's name all over it. It was conceived on the back of a napkin before the 2016 election when Councillor Schrinner was the Transport Committee Chair. The Metro, or more accurately, the Overseas Bendy Bus project. Now, this project was supposed to cost just over $900 million. That's now blown out to $1.7 billion. It's almost doubled in price, but the scope of that project has hardly changed. Well, actually, in fact, it's been scaled back. Now, we all remember it was announced as a metro to rival the undergrounds of Paris and London. That's what this Lord Mayor promised the people of Brisbane. There were plans to build an underground station in South Brisbane in grand red brick. We all remember those photos, don't we? Look at that subway system that the LNP promised the people of Brisbane. Well, now it's just a short busway extension and 60 overpriced, overseas-made electric buses. But the real kick in the guts for residents is the amount of money this administration has wasted on marketing this project. In this 2017-18 financial year, we saw $250,000 blown on advertising this project. In 18-19, that skyrocketed to $830,000. Last financial year was $500,000. And when we asked the LNP's spend this financial year in questions on notice, they refused to tell us. One can only imagine how big that bill is now. But what we do know for sure is that the LNP Mayor spent $64,000 on gimmicky promotional materials, including Metro pens, Metro bags, Metro jigsaw puzzles, little Metro mini fold-out bus models. $64,000 of ratepayers' money. And they've also thrown more than $700,000 on an inner-city display showroom that hardly anyone visits. And who can forget those Brisbane TV ads that were pushed out in the lead up to the 2020 council election, boasting a turn-up-and-go Metro as if services were already running. What a complete and utter waste of residents' money. Now, this LNP Mayor is so self-conscious of how much of a failure this project has become that he's overcompensating by spending millions on advertising and marketing it. This is nothing but an expensive ploy to try and brainwash the people of Brisbane. It's an absolute beat-up at their expense. Another classic Councillor Schrinner beat-up is the so-called green bridges. He stood up publicly in 2019 and said that he would deliver 5 green bridges. That was his promise to the people of Brisbane. Well, the LNP Mayor said if he couldn't get funding from other levels of government, from the state or federal government, he would go it alone. That's what he said. He said he would go it alone. Now, less than 3 years later, all we have is the pedestrian bridge at Kangaroo Point and that bikeway extension over Breakfast Creek, that one coming in at an eye-watering $260,000 per metre. The LNP councillor for Pullenvale killed off the first bridge. The LNP Mayor has killed off the next 2 bridges using the floods as an excuse. It's no wonder Brisbane residents have serious trust issues with this LNP administration. Another inner-city project that's getting the Lord Mayor's undivided attention is Barambin or Victoria Park. The Lord Mayor allocated $84 million to this single inner-city park, while parks out in the suburbs, parks that people are actually using, are being starved of funding. They can't even get their grass mown, for goodness sake. The LNP is spending billions on a handful of inner-city projects for one reason. They get him publicity. They're glitzy, they have catchy names. He stands up and performs re-announcement after re-announcement of the same thing. He is self-obsessed, and his entire vision for this city is built around a strategy of self-promotion. But getting hits in the media is not enough to satisfy this Mayor's appetite. He also uses council's official communications budget to advertise himself. Now, despite repeated calls, this LNP Mayor still spends around $6 million to plaster his face over 21 million copies of council's monthly newsletter. He puts his face on everything, from event brochures, seniors' songbooks, business forum emails, and now even certificates. This LNP Mayor's addiction to self-promotion knows no bounds, and residents are being forced to pay for it against their will. If you asked any resident in the street if they're okay with the LNP Mayor using their money to politically promote himself on official council documents, the answer would be absolutely not. And just yesterday, the Mayor was sending out promotional material to flood-affected communities with incorrect information about the rates rebate. But that probably wouldn't have bothered the Lord Mayor much, as long as he got his face on it. The Lord Mayor's failed Brisbane app is also sucking the budget dry. Now, this app is costing residents $4.5 million. This is the app the Lord Mayor and LNP councillors use to promote themselves. This is the app performing so badly that the Lord Mayor had to get his staff to leave fake 5-star reviews, pumping up its rating. And it's no wonder, because the genuine reviews from Brisbane residents are appalling. One person wrote, and I quote, "What's the point of this? It's a clunkier version of Google Maps and My Business. Waste of ratepayer money." Couldn't agree more. Another said, "Why has Brisbane City Council wasted so much money making this app and over $2 million advertising it? Who are all the stooges giving it 5 stars? The rate of uninstalls and average time of use per session are perhaps the most revealing figures. Per month, around 4,000 people uninstall the Brisbane app, and that's just Android users. When you take in Apple users, those figures are astronomically higher. Now, the average time of use ranges between, wait for it, 17 seconds and 33 seconds. so it doesn't take long for people to figure out what a dud this app is. What a complete and utter waste of ratepayers' money. It would be a joke if it wasn't costing the residents of Brisbane $4.5 million as a self-promotional ploy by this Lord Mayor. And that's why residents are seeing the biggest rates hike in over a decade. And last but certainly not least, this LNP Mayor's $100,000 allowance. Work allowances are meant to be spent on work-related expenses. But under the LNP, this Lord Mayor can spend that $100,000 however he likes. It's not audited or tracked in any way. It's nothing more than a $100,000 cash bonus that the LNP Mayor pays himself from the pockets of ratepayers. And I renew my call today for any councillor who receives an allowance to have that tracked and audited. Now, all of these things I've mentioned, the Living in Brisbane political flyers, the songbooks, the event brochures, the LNP Mayor putting his face on, the cost blowout inner-city projects that he uses to get publicity, the failed Brisbane app and the $100,000 allowance. None of them have been cut in the budget. Not one of them. In fact, we've seen a record number of newsletters featuring the LNP Mayor being pumped out. When the floods hit and the recovery bill rolled in, what was the first thing on this Mayor's chopping block? Suburban projects and suburban services. We saw bikeways get the chop, park upgrades gutted and cut, and services scaled back. The Lord Mayor could have cut his advertising budget instead, saving millions and potentially saving these suburban projects, but he made a choice. He chose himself over the people of Brisbane. Another weapon in this Lord Mayor's arsenal for self-promotion is the Olympics. We've heard directly from council itself that its only role in the 2032 Games is to make sure the city runs smoothly. The streets are clean, the bins are collected, traffic is managed and crowds are controlled. But this minor supportive role hasn't stopped Councillor Schrinner and the LNP from using the Games to get publicity. We saw the LNP Mayor go out to the media announcing a $200 million purchase of Olympic land. Well, he's now confirmed he's going to pour that $200 million into his favourite inner-city black hole project, the Brisbane Metro. So let's be clear, he never intended to use that money for anything else. He couldn't get his deputy, Councillor Adams, on the actual Brisbane organising committee, so as a consolation prize he used residents' money to establish an extra committee here in council instead, the Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games Committee. He's used residents' money to increase the number of civic cabinet chair positions from 7 to 8. For Lord Mayor Schrinner and the LNP, the Olympic and Paralympic Games is purely a PR exercise. What council should be focusing on is ensuring that the 2032 Games leave a suburban legacy. We need to use the Olympics as a catalyst for change, to increase housing supply, improve flood mitigation in our city, upgrade council facilities, nurture community organisations, address climate change and support local jobs. But under the LNP, that will never be a priority. The Lord Mayor has made it abundantly clear that he does not care about local manufacturing. When he had the chance to buy electric buses from Brisbane, built in Brisbane, he bought them from China instead. He could have worked directly with South East Queensland manufacturers to design and build articulated electric buses for his so-called metro, but he chose to support Swiss jobs instead. He said there were no job losses at local bus manufacturers, as if he had anything to do with that. Well, quite the opposite, Lord Mayor. It was the Labor government that stepped in and started building locally made electric buses at Volgren that saved those jobs. So the equation is simple. Labor cares about jobs in Brisbane and the LNP does not. He could be building playgrounds with equipment manufactured here in Queensland, but he's choosing to order that in from Europe. At every opportunity, this LNP Mayor has chosen to snub local jobs, to snub local workers and to snub local families. His lack of care for local workers stretches far further, with the LNP Mayor using hundreds of millions of dollars to contract ongoing basic council work out. And just last month we saw a contract for $63 million come to council for the recruitment of temporary labour hire workers. That's $63 million of residents' money being spent by the LNP to promote insecure work. Most of this work includes things like mowing, footpath repairs, road resurfacing and other fundamental ongoing council work. This could and should be $63 million spent to create hundreds of in-house stable jobs. That is, of course, on top of the hundreds of millions we see spent each year on this practice of casualising our workforce. But under the LNP, council's workforce is becoming more and more disposable. Council workers have less rights, less access to leave and less job security with the LNP in charge here in City Hall. There are many critical issues that are plaguing Brisbane and harming our city's livability. These problems have only been exacerbated by the February 22 flood disaster. And for some time now, Labor councillors have been calling for these issues to be addressed. Right now, the priorities for council should be addressing this city's housing affordability crisis, our ability to mitigate the impact of floods and climate change. Labor has called for three main outcomes in this year's budget: a $200 million investment into social and affordable housing, a $120 million allocation to build, upgrade and maintain suburban drainage systems to improve flood mitigation, and the immediate rollout of a food organics, garden organics waste management system, better known as FOGO. The LNP mayor has failed to commit to a single one. In 2002, under a Labor administration, Brisbane City Council established the Brisbane Housing Company, an expert housing provider that puts roofs over heads. Brisbane Housing Company has transformed our initial $16 million investment into around $350 million worth of social and affordable housing across this city. Soon after Labor's $16 million investment, the LNP took charge of City Hall, and over the last 18 years, they've spent just $500,000 on social and affordable housing, according to their own figures.
That's your fault, though.
And apparently that's our fault, though. The LNP administration recently borrowed $200 million to purchase land for the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. But thanks to the state government stepping in, council no longer needs to buy any Olympic sites. Labor has repeatedly called for that $200 million to be reinvested into social and affordable housing. But the LNP mayor decided to pour that into his Black Hole Metro project instead, and in this budget we see no financial commitment to addressing the housing crisis, which is just disgraceful. This LNP mayor's answer to the housing crisis is a token line in his budget speech, and perhaps what we need to do is remember what Councillor Schrinner said when describing low-cost housing as a reason for this.
Yes,
it wasn't that long ago when Adrian Schrinner described public housing as a slum. He said on increasing the stock of public housing in Carina Heights, and I quote, "If the state government thinks local residents will stand by and watch Carina Heights turned into a slum, they are gravely mistaken." Adrian Schrinner, ever the political operator, never the leader. His solution is increasing rates on short-term rental properties by 50%. So Brisbane has over 800,000 dwellings and just 7,000 of them are listed on Airbnb. That's less than 1%. Residents and Labor councillors have applied sustained pressure on this LNP mayor to address Brisbane's housing crisis, but he's failed yet again. This policy is the absolute bare minimum, a band-aid response, a political ploy to make it look like he's actually doing something. It proves just how little Adrian Schrinner and the LNP care about housing affordability in our city. The REIQ has even dismissed this weak do-nothing policy from Adrian Schrinner, saying paying an extra 50% in your rates probably won't constitute much of a disincentive. Most of these Airbnb properties will be able to pay off this extra rates increase in a single weekend. No effect at all. As the biggest council in Australia, this LNP-run Brisbane City Council needs to be doing much more to ensure residents have access to a safe and secure home. Shelter is one of the most basic human rights. If Labor was in charge, addressing housing affordability would be one of our biggest priorities. Implementing a full FOGO waste management system would also be a key focus of Labor's. The LNP's go-slow approach to food recycling will end up costing residents millions of dollars. Adrian Schrinner has been refusing to commit to a full FOGO service. The LNP mayor believes trialling a half-cocked food recycling service that doesn't even include meat offcuts is sufficient. It's not. Brisbane City Council could and should be doing so much more. A full FOGO service would remove around 80,000 tonnes of organic waste from Brisbane landfills, allowing us to compost everything from eggshells to fruit and vegetable scraps, meat offcuts, and even dog poo. Waste levy charges are set to rise significantly, and if this council does not implement a full FOGO service now, ratepayers will be slugged with huge levy increases. FOGO isn't just financially beneficial, of course, it will create jobs and address climate change too. FOGO is the single most effective thing a council can do to reduce a city's carbon footprint. By implementing FOGO, we can even create our own carbon credits instead of buying them from China. Now, recycling waste creates 3 times as many jobs as traditional landfill. By investing in FOGO, council would be creating thousands of stable, ongoing, local jobs for generations to come. No matter if you live in an apartment in Nunda or a house in Callumvale, FOGO gives everyone the ability to address climate change, save money in waste levy charges, reduce waste and create jobs just by putting kitchen food scraps into a different bin. Despite all of the benefits, the LNP Mayor is refusing to commit, and our city will suffer because of his conservative leadership. If Labor was in charge of this budget, we would be unapologetically focused on the suburbs. We wouldn't be pouring billions into a few inner-city projects, we'll be pouring billions into park upgrades, footpath repairs, drainage projects and busting congestion. Parks would be mowed on time, streets would actually have footpaths, and we would prioritise active transport infrastructure. We would be investing record amounts in suburban drainage. The February floods have made it very clear that our suburbs are severely lacking in basic drainage infrastructure. Labor would be upgrading and repairing the old, maintaining the current and installing new drainage in suburbs that have been left behind by this LNP administration. We would be upgrading council facilities, not bulldozing them or cutting grants to community organisations. Labor would be using the Olympics as a catalyst to upgrade sporting clubs and invest in social and affordable housing, not as a PR tool for self-promotion like this LNP Mayor is doing. The Lord Mayor's idea of an Olympic legacy is Swiss buses and one cycle track. How short-sighted. We would fix Brisbane's broken planning system by giving residents a genuine say on how their neighbourhoods developed over the next generation. We would take them on the journey of growth, not tell them what they are going to get or else. The reactionary, secretive and top-down planning approach we have under the LNP needs a serious overhaul. We would build things here. Council's electric buses will be made in Brisbane by Brisbane workers, not shipped in from China and Switzerland. We would be building playgrounds with equipment made in Queensland, not Finland. We will be bolstering council's in-house workforce and giving more permanent jobs to temporary labour hire workers. We would pride ourselves on creating secure, local workforce to provide quality, on-time services to the people of Brisbane. We would put the residents of Brisbane and their suburbs first in every decision we make. It's not what someone says that reveals their priorities, it's what they do. It's abundantly clear through this LNP Mayor's actions and the actions of his LNP administration that their priorities are themselves and holding on to power. If the LNP's priorities were the people of Brisbane, we would see record investments in projects to combat the housing affordability crisis. We would see cuts to advertising, not cuts to mosquito spraying. We would see the fast-tracking of critical drainage infrastructure in our suburbs. We would see footpaths being fixed in days, not years. We would see parks being mowed properly and on time. We would see council assets meticulously maintained, not bulldozed. We would see community clubs thriving, not having their grants cut and struggling to keep the lights on. We would see a full FOGO waste management system already operating. We would see traffic congestion across our city reducing, not increasing. But we see none of these things from Adrian Schrinner and the LNP. Residents are sick and tired of coming last on this LNP administration's priority list. Residents are sick and tired of seeing their rates going up every year and getting less for them. Since the LNP have been in charge, we've seen our rates double. But services are going backwards. That is not good value for money. Residents are sick and tired of you, Lord Mayor, of your LNP values and your LNP leadership. Your tired old LNP administration has been in charge of this city for nearly 20 years too long. Bring on 2024, because it's clear after the federal election, another 4-year term under the LNP is not what the people of Brisbane want need or deserve to endure. And on a personal note, I'd just like to thank my team for their support over the last week in preparing Labor's response to the budget, particularly while I've been in COVID isolation. My colleagues, Councillor Cook and Councillor Griffiths, who've stepped up, and Councillor Strunk and Cumming and your staff for their support as well. My team here in City Hall, most of whom are also knocked out with COVID, Victoria, Tom and Jess, and my ward staff, Jen and Amanda and Quinn. And a special thanks to my outgoing media advisor, Tristan, who finishes up today. The ongoing and building success of our team is in no small part to the contribution you have made, Tristan, over the last 2 years. So best of luck on your new adventures and challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. I now call on the Civic Cabinet Chair of Finance and City Governance Committee, Councillor Fiona Cunningham, to reply. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is an honour to stand here today to speak in support for Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner's 2022-23 Council budget. Mr. Chair, this is a responsible and balanced budget. It is a budget for the suburbs of Brisbane. It is a budget which is built on strong financial foundations. Most importantly, it is a budget which is our blueprint to rebuild and recover from the floods. Mr. Chair, on this side of the chamber, we understand the seriousness of managing Australia's largest local government on behalf of ratepayers. It is a huge responsibility, but the residents of Brisbane know that in our Lord Mayor and in the entire Schrinner Council team, they have the leadership and the discipline in City Hall to do the job. It is this discipline which has served our city so well over the past 3 years, a period of time like no other in our city's history. Mr. Chair, our last 2 budgets were heavily coloured by the pandemic. In response to COVID-19, the Schrinner Council moved quickly to provide support to residents, small businesses and our community. Whether it was the reduction in rates payable in 2021, to direct payments to community clubs to keep them going, to waiving a raft of fees and charges to support struggling businesses, we did what was needed. It was the right thing to do, but it does come at a cost, Mr. Chair. The impact of the pandemic on Council's finances is well in excess of $200 million to date. In the 15 months to June 21, revenue was reduced by $132 million, and we faced a further reduction of $88 million in the current financial year. In addition to our direct assistance package, we also faced a downgrade of $93 million in infrastructure charges and a decrease of over $40 million in parking-related revenue. Throughout it all, we resisted the calls of those opposite to continue spending like there wasn't a pandemic. We also didn't take the advice of the Queensland Treasurer, who complained we weren't even in deficit, as if responsible management of a budget was a thing to be avoided. Despite the $200 million hit to our budget, we retained our strong credit rating with the Queensland Treasury Corporation. We kept the budget strong because we know that governments need to be prepared to face difficult circumstances and have the ability to respond when required. This year, we all know we faced another significant challenge. In the final weekend in February, we had an event which will not soon be forgotten by the people of Brisbane. The heavens opened. We had unprecedented rainfall across consecutive days. While the river flood peak was higher in 2011, the 2022 flood will be remembered for the scale of damage right across Brisbane. In 2011, 14,000 properties across 94 suburbs were affected. This time around, we saw river flooding combined with creek and overland flow flooding to inundate over 23,000 properties across 177 out of Brisbane's 190 suburbs. Of course, we must never forget the tragic toll that this event had. People lost their homes, their possessions and memories, and some even lost loved ones. Many people are still dealing with the consequences of the floods. But the Schrinner Council rapidly responded to the event. There were over 3,000 streets cleared, 75,000 tonnes of waste collected, and 29,000 free trips to our resource recovery centres. This was Brisbane's biggest ever clean-up. As during the pandemic, we also had a rapid financial response, providing timely and targeted support to those who most needed it. We quickly moved to delay residential rates notices by a month. We provided flood-affected homeowners with a generous $250 rebate, meaning for thousands of residents across the city, their annual rates bill went backwards 2 years in a row. We've had over 15,000 ratepayers apply for the rebate, and we expect this to keep going through to June 30. That's close to $4 million in direct support. We provided 272 community clubs with direct $5,000 clean-up payments totalling $1.36 million. As we all know, the widespread flooding caused significant damage to our council and to our community assets. The damages include 198 buildings on community leased facilities, 106 sports fields, 4 of our public pools, 285 kilometres of road. There were 235 kilometres of bikeways inundated, 863 parks, 25 toilet facilities, 300 playgrounds, 74 car parks, and over 4,000 park, bikeway and street lights. The rebuild bill, plus council's costs for direct support to flood victims and significant operational expenses, mean this was a very costly event. All up, council faces a bill of over $600 million, half of which will need to be directly funded by ratepayers. The net financial impact is 3 times what it was in 2011. To fund our recovery, we had to make difficult decisions to pause or cancel some significant projects, but the Schrinner Council has never and will never shy away from making the decisions needed to keep our budget sustainable. The floods came at a time when not only were governments and businesses dealing with the costs of the pandemic, but when everyone, including households, were dealing with the effects of inflation. The war in Europe, supply chain issues, these are having a major impact on nearly every facet of our economy, not least of all on household budgets. And council is not immune to these costs. Bitumen is one example, Mr Chair, where we have seen costs skyrocket nearly 50% in the past 2 years alone. So it is with this heavy backdrop of a pandemic, of floods and high inflation that this budget has had to be developed. These are difficult times and they present significant challenges which are still evolving. In many ways, the concept of business as usual is a thing of the past. The new normal is about adapting to our changing circumstances. This is why our long track record of responsible financial management and balanced budgets have been so critical to our ability to respond to the recent challenges. And respond we have, Mr Chair. The $4 billion budget handed down by the Lord Mayor is one which prioritises Brisbane's flood recovery. It delivers critical infrastructure and guarantees suburban spending on things that are important to our residents. At the centre of this budget is a $500 million rebuild and recover plan. Over the next 3 years, we will rebuild our city, suburb by suburb, street by street. As part of that rebuild and recovery plan, we'll invest $27 million to repair ferries and ferry terminals, $59 million to fix our bikeways, $39 million for roads, $54 million for sea and river walls, $12 million for other river assets such as wharves, jetties and pontoons, $53 million for damaged parks and $12 million for rebuilding our pools. Because of the adjustments made to the budget last month, we are able to prioritise and fund these critical works. But it's about more than just rebuilding. We want to build back better and create a more resilient community. In this budget, we have funded the delivery of all 37 recommendations of former Governor Paul Derjersey's 2022 flood review. It speaks volumes about the Schrinner Council's serious commitment to create a more resilient and flood-smart city that here we are in mid-June, less than 4 months after the floods, that we have not only completed a thorough review, but we have also funded the delivery of these recommendations. The next severe weather season will be here before we know it, and we have no time to waste. We can't stop flooding altogether, but we can always be better prepared, and the recommendations are our blueprint to help ensure that happens. Further demonstrating this commitment is our drainage budget. We're committing $131 million towards drainage in this year's budget. That's more than double our usual spend. We've heard a lot of misinformation from the opposition about drainage spending even before the budget was released. But the numbers don't lie, even if the Leader of the Opposition can't add them up. Mr Chair, it's no wonder he can't add them up through you. He can't tell the difference between 33 seconds and 33 minutes when it comes to the Brisbane app. Mr Chair, we've heard the Leader of the Opposition calling for an increase in drainage from $60 million to $120 million. He has it then said that there was only $40 million budgeted. Again, the Lord Mayor has more than doubled the drainage spend in this year's budget to $131 million. Our drainage investment is a key pillar of our record spending in the suburbs.
Councillor Johnston, please.
$3.4 billion of Council's investment is earmarked for our suburbs this year. That represents 86% of the total Council budget. No matter what those opposite say, suburbs will always come first under this Lord Mayor, and that will not change. We have introduced a new Suburbs First guarantee, mandating at least 80% of the budget spend to be spent in our suburbs. We're spending $83 million on road resurfacing this year, with $365 million allocated over the next 4 years. $35 million will be spent on building and improving footpaths this year, another record spend. And of course, as always, if councillors have any additional priority footpath projects in their area, these can be funded through their local Suburban Enhancement Fund, in addition to the record $35 million spend. That's a pool of nearly $15 million, in addition to the $35 for footpaths in the budget. There is well over $200 million for our parks and playgrounds in this year's budget, Mr Chair. A new initiative is a $10 million three-year plan to provide shade cover over every playground in Brisbane. Whether it's shade sails or mature trees, we want to do everything we can to help protect our kids from the harsh Queensland sun and to make our playgrounds usable for longer, even on those hot summer days. Ask any parent and they'll tell you that playgrounds are essential infrastructure, and the Schrinner Council is providing high-quality playgrounds right across Brisbane's suburbs. Thanks to years of investment and focus from this side of the chamber, Brisbane is a clean and green city and Australia's largest carbon-neutral government. We're also investing in our natural areas, continuing our bushland acquisition program started by Sally Ann Atkinson, with $29 million to be spent over the next 4 years to purchase and protect our precious bushland. Part of protecting our natural areas is ensuring that active recreation occurs in a sustainable way. And in this year's budget, we have $2.7 million over the 4 years in additional funding to deliver outcomes from our off-road cycling strategy. We continue to support a vibrant community with more to see and do. And this year we will spend $4.8 million in support for festivals and events right across Brisbane. Also, part of our suburban spend is $26.6 million for pools and aquatic centres. This includes the commencement of an upgrade at the Chermside Aquatic Centre and the refurbishment of Newmarket Olympic Pool. Roads are essential suburban infrastructure, and on this side of the chamber, we know that we need to keep investing in our road network and delivering projects that make it easier to get around our city and suburbs. Over the next 2 years, we'll invest more than $130 million on completing the Moggill Road Corridor Upgrade project, which will ease congestion and improve safety for road users travelling through Brisbane's busy western suburbs, with works to improve the overall operation of the corridor and help get residents home sooner and safer. The $60.6 million Beams Road project and the $46.1 million Gardner Road project will also be completed over the coming years. The major upgrades at Hoyland Street and Norris Road will be completed this year, as will the Newnham and Rueka Road intersection works, which will make it easier and safer for locals to get to and from the local hammer barn. While rebuilding and recovering from the floods is our focus, we continue to deliver on ongoing city-shaping projects. The Brisbane Metro pilot vehicle has arrived, and it has been wonderful to see it out and about on Brisbane roads. We've all also seen the progress being made on the Adelaide Street Tunnel. There is $288 million being invested in the Brisbane Metro public transport project this year, Mr Chair. We're also investing $174 million in our green bridges at Kangaroo Point and Breakfast Creek to dramatically improve active transport options for residents. As you can see, Mr Chair, there is significant investment in this budget, and it is clear that in Brisbane, ratepayers pay less and get more. Our minimum rates are the lowest in southeast Queensland by some distance. Despite continuing to invest record amounts in our suburbs, continuing to build much-needed infrastructure and continuing our flood recovery, Brisbane will still have the cheapest residential rates in southeast Queensland. This year, we will also create a new rebate to provide $1,000 for eligible flood-affected homeowners whose homes remain uninhabitable. Mr Chair,
Councillor
Mr Chair,
Johnston, please.
this week, the Gold Coast City Council delivered their budget, with their minimum rate going up by 5.4% for owner-occupied houses, and the average general rate going up by 4.99%. So despite an over $300 million net impact from the floods here in Brisbane, we have still delivered a lower rates increase than the Gold Coast and more than 1 percentage point lower than CPI. When Labor were last in power, we saw not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 rate rises of above 6%. That is their record on rates, and they can't erase it from history. Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn now to the topic of housing. It is rightly a key focus for us at the moment, for us all at the moment, and the Lord Mayor is determined to pull the levers that Council can to improve housing availability. The rental vacancy rate in Brisbane is just 0.6%, a record low. That is a sobering statistic for anyone looking for a long-term rental property at the moment. The chronic underinvestment in building new social housing by the state Labor government isn't helping either. There are 3 initiatives in this budget that I want to highlight.
Point of order, Councillor Johnston.
Yes, I just check on the time for the Finance Chair's speech. It's been 20 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Johnston. I'm quite conscious of that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, as I was saying, there are 3 initiatives in the budget that I wanted to highlight. Firstly, we have announced new charges to disincentivise the proliferation of short-stay accommodation in residential homes and apartments across Brisbane. These houses and apartments were built to be homes for families, not to be pseudo-hotels. We're increasing rates for those renting out homes for more than 60 nights a year. They will pay 50% more than other non-owner occupiers. We want to encourage more of the homes to transition to the long-term rental market. Housing advocacy group Q Shelter has welcomed this announcement from the Lord Mayor. In a statement, they said, Q Shelter commends the leadership of Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner in announcing a 50% increase in rates for property owners who list homes for short-term accommodation. We need to incentivise the return of these properties to the private rental market so more people can find a home. It is a great example of a local government demonstrating commitment and practical solutions to the housing crisis. It goes on. There is no doubt that the trend in listing privately owned homes as temporary accommodation is removing housing options from people, including families who are desperately searching for a home." End quote. Mr. Chair, this is not a set and forget policy though. There will be a staged implementation this year, and of course we will monitor the situation and be nimble and flexible to ensure that we get the outcome that residents expect. The Lord Mayor has also provided $3 million in funding for another 3 years of Pathways Out of Homelessness. Programs like the ones that have been run in the past by Beyond DV and MICA projects have performed extremely well, and we want to provide additional funding to these successful initiatives. The Lord Mayor also announced a program to identify new suburban renewal precincts. Finding land that might have previously had a commercial or light industry use, which could instead accommodate new homes to meet demand sooner. The opposition's plan for housing, if you could even call it a plan, is light on detail, a thought bubble based on money which doesn't exist. He knows there is no spare $200 million under the couch. It was allocated to public transport, which will be supported by the Palaszczuk and Albanese governments. We don't support ripping $200 million out of our public transport. Mr. Chair, we hear a lot from the opposition about housing, but we all know that any solution to the housing crisis that doesn't involve more homes including ones on the private market, is just window dressing. That's why it's so galling to see them talk about housing and then refuse to support neighbourhood plans to build more homes. I'd like to add to this, Mr. Chair. The other thing about the Greens allegedly caring for renters is that I would feel a little bit more comfortable about it if their record actually backed it up. But they have a long record of opposing new housing. There are often housing proposals that are close to busway stations, close to a train station, close to the CBD and workplaces in the high-density zone. They always find an excuse. The Greens spin, they oppose development. They characterise it in ways that are politically spun, but basically are blocking housing being built during a housing crisis. It is the greatest hypocrisy and it has to be called out. It is lacking integrity, it is lacking in ethics. It's the worst bit of political spin and it needs to be identified.
Councillor Johnston.
Mr. Chair, all of that was a quote from Queensland Labor Transport Minister Mark Bailey. He makes very good points, Mr. Chair. However, sadly, he makes very good points, but I think we'll leave it at that, Lord Mayor. Sadly for the Minister, his Labor colleagues here in this chamber are just as bad because they are in lockstep with the Greens. To be clear, I'm not cherry-picking a couple of examples from a few years ago. This kind of behaviour is happening right now in the middle of a housing availability and affordability crisis. Now, Mr. Chair, Councillor Sri isn't here today, but tomorrow he'll host an event with his state colleague to not only oppose a proposed development in his area, but to create a blockade across the driveway of a concrete supplier to attempt to intimidate them into no longer providing concrete to build projects they don't like. The event says they want to send a clear message.
Point of order, Councillor Johnston.
I am very concerned that Councillor Cunningham is imputing motive and look, I don't know what Councillor Sri may or may not do tomorrow, and certainly Councillor Cunningham does not know either.
Public
but
event.
certainly the accusation that somehow he'll be intimidating a business is inappropriate language.
Councillor Johnston, I don't accept that that's a point of order. Councillor Cunningham.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Point of order.
It is unsuitable meeting conduct. That's my understanding of what we raise. And when a councillor imputes motive and says that another councillor is going to intimidate people, that is disrespectful, that is not engaging in constructive debate, and they are all issues of unsuitable meeting conduct that are in your purview to address.
This is not a point of order.
Councillor Wines, please let me deal with one point of order at a time. Councillor Johnson, I don't accept that that's a point of order. This is a political forum, and I understand that Councillor Cunningham is making a point on issues that have been put in the public forum via Facebook. I understand that to be the case.
That's right, Mr. Chair. It is a Facebook event.
And point of order.
Point of order to you, Councillor Johnson.
So just to be clear then, the Facebook event says that Councillor Sri is going to intimidate people tomorrow, does it?
Councillor Johnson,
I just would like to be clear.
Councillor
If you
Johnson,
let
I
me
will
finish,
respond to your
Councillor
point of
Johnson,
order.
I'll tell you exactly what it says.
Councillor,
I would just like to know that you think it's okay for
If you
another
let me
councillor...
finish, I'll tell you exactly what it says,
Councillor
Councillor
Johnston, please. Councillor Cunningham, I'll deal with a point of order. Councillor Johnston.
So saying it's...
Councillor Johnston, please. I'm responding to you.
I haven't heard what I've said.
Councillor Johnston, I'm responding to you. Please do not talk over me. Thank you. I believe that the issue that Councillor Cunningham has raised is in relation to an event that's been posted on Facebook. I understand that Councillor Cunningham was within her rights to raise those issues in this current debate. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Johnston, you can rule dissent in my ruling if you like. Otherwise, please sit down.
Mr. Chairman, the issue is her language
Councillor
accusing
Johnson, I've made a
Councillor
ruling
Sri
on the
of
point of order.
intimidating
Please sit.
somebody when that has
Please
not happened.
sit down. You're talking over me. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Facebook event says, quote, wants to send a clear message to any companies thinking about working on these projects that if these developments go ahead, they will make it very hard for all involved. If that's not intimidatory, I don't know what is. It is extraordinary, Mr. Chair. It was interesting to hear Councillor Cassidy talk about the things.
Councillor Johnston.
Mr. Chair, it was interesting to hear Councillor Cassidy talk about the things that he thinks a Labor council would do better. Obviously, we know he's full of hot air and deception when it comes to the Schrinner Council's record, but I want to focus on the phrase Labor council and Labor administration, because we all know that a Labor council is actually a thing of the past. The options are a strong, united, gender-balanced and experienced Schrinner Council or a divided and hopelessly inexperienced Labor-Green shambles of a coalition.
Councillor Cunningham, your time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I move that this meeting be adjourned until 9 a.m. Wednesday, 22nd of June 2022, to allow for the program information sessions to be held later today and on Monday, the 20th of June 2022, on the budget programs.
Seconded.
Thank you. It has been moved by the Lord Mayor and seconded by the Deputy Mayor that this meeting be adjourned until 9 a.m. on Wednesday, 22 June 2022, to allow for program information sessions to be held later today and on Monday, 20 June 2022, on the budget programs. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Councillors, this meeting now stands adjourned until 9 a.m. on Wednesday, 22 June.